Many people call and ask what to do about a large old tree that has a hole in it. Should they fill it? Should they not? And with us today is Mark Bays, who's the Urban Forestry Coordinator for the Department of Agriculture, and he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the tradition behind filling trees and how to do it properly. And Mark, thanks for talking to us today.
Hey, glad to be here. Appreciate you inviting me. A tree cavity, let's think about that for a little bit. Everybody, well, I have cavities in my mouth, and if you think about how a cavity spreads in your mouth, well, what happens is you have decay come in, spreads all through the tooth, and eventually that whole tooth will rot out unless you do something for that tooth. Well, what do? You grind out all the decay, you sanitize it, and then you fill that with some sort of filling. And that actually is some of the early thinking behind how trees were traditionally filled. We've been filling trees for a long time, and actually it originates way back in Europe, and it was kind of a sign of the times. You were real affluent if you could have your tree filled. It was kind of something that only the rich and famous could afford because it cost so much. And during the early years, what they were doing is they do it the same way, just like we fill our teeth. They'd go in, they'd grind all that decay out, they'd sanitize it somehow with something, and then they'd put concrete in there because at the time, concrete, it was thought that it would seal off that internal cavity in the tree, and then it would actually give strength to the tree. But what we're finding out these days is that was really the wrong way to be doing it.
Okay, well, we've got one here that's actually been done properly, and let's take a look at that.
Okay. Yeah, what this is a silver maple that at some point in the past lost a branch, whether it was caused by the wind blowing it or they just pruned it. It lost this side of the branch, and it was such a large large opening there that the tree was never really able to seal over very quickly. So what happened is then all sorts of water and everything started getting into the tree and caused a real moist environment, and then internal decay started in this tree.
Now the water isn't actually what's hurting the tree.
No,
right?
It's really not the water itself that causes the decay. It's that moist environment that makes it inviting for other pathogens to get into the tree and then start causing the decay. And then what also happens is anytime that occurs, or there's an opening in a tree, then insects like ants can get in, or termites could cause some internal cavities as well. Now this particular one happened to be a real deep cavity that was formed. We came out here a year ago, and the landowner, he was real concerned about it, the fact that it was holding water, or that it was always moist. He has a sprinkler system here, so it was continually having water thrown on the tree. So it was really an environment that made it for lots of decay in this tree. We chose, one thing that's done is that some people say, well, we need to get rid of that water. What some folks think that you might want to do is come in below here. This cavity was actually several inches below the opening here, and they thought about, well, let's put a drain tube to keep that water drained out. Well, that's not a good thing to be doing, because as trees grow, new growth rings are put on the tree, and it'll compartmentalize that decay that forms in the tree. And if you drill a hole through that good tissue, well, then you're going to be opening up that good tissue or that new growth each year to the decay that's going on the inside of the tree.
So you're actually spreading the problem.
You're actually spreading the problem. You should never drill to drain a cavity in your tree.
Okay. Well, you've actually filled this with something other than cement, and what is this?
Yeah, well, this is a urethane foam, and there's two types of expandable foams available. There's a polyurethane and a urethane foam, and the urethane foam is really more elastic than the polyurethane foam. So what they're saying now is it's really a good idea to fill that hole with urethane foam. Now what you don't want to do is what we talked about earlier, what they did in the past, is go in and clean all this interior decay out and get to that good clean wood. What happens when you do that is that you break that boundary wall. Trees put on growth each year with growth rings, and each year it puts on new growth. It seals off whatever problems that tree's having on the inside. So if you grind into that fresh clean wood, where you're gonna potentially be spreading that decay into the clean wood. It's just like drilling through it. You don't want to do that at all. What we did here is we just kind of broke it out, got somewhat of a smooth surface. We didn't break into the good wood, and then put an expandable urethane foam down in that hole, and it just kind of bellowed out.
Okay. Well, now with this, if you don't want it to deteriorate, can you cover this with anything?
Yeah. The next step, you know, if cosmetics are a major concern, this was really just to plug up the hole and to kind of stop the water from being there and creating that moist environment. There's another phase that you can do. You can actually come back in with some body putty of like just car filler and kind of seal that off. I mean, this will eventually probably erode with time, and you can kind of tell it chips away pretty easily. But you could put some body filler to cover that, and maybe, you know, you can even paint it to match the color of the tree, something along that line.
Well, you've got some examples of like trees dealing with decay and stuff like that. Can we take a look at those?
Well, sure, yeah. Well, let's look at this one first of all. And this kind of helps illustrate, I think, you know, what's going on a tree. You know, we talked about compartmentalization. Well, look at all the internal decay. This branch was pruned off of a Shumard oak that was overhanging 21st Street in Tulsa. It's a major thoroughfare. And this was caused by improper pruning. I mean, they just kept continually dehorning or topping this tree. And what happened is the internal decay started in that tree. It moved all the way down the trunk, and it's actually going into the main stem of the tree. And this was probably 20 feet back. And you know, so this is not a lot of growth that's going on the outside of that tree. But if you look here, what you can see is each year as growth occurred on this tree, none of this interior decay was being spread out into the surrounding part of the tree. And see, that's the big difference between our teeth and our trees, because trees put on new growth. Our teeth won't really do that. And so that's why we have to treat trees just a little bit differently.
We have to have a little more flexible of a filler then.
Yeah, right, for trees, that's for sure.
Okay.
But
well, you keep talking about improper pruning. How should a person prune to prevent this happening?
Well, the number one cause of cavities being, the number one cause of cavities in communities is improper pruning, and that's with flush cuts. It used to be that you have a good flush cut on a tree, that the thought was, well, you'd have a bigger callus so the tree would seal more quickly and it would be better for the tree. But what happens is you create a larger wound, and then so there's a bigger problem that's going to provide a larger opening for internal decay to form on that tree. Proper pruning techniques is with target pruning. You've had a lot of segments about proper pruning on the branch collar. You don't want to cut behind that branch collar, the swelling on the tree. You want to just cut on the outside of that, just touching that, and then that tree will seal over quicker. Proper pruning is probably the best way to prevent a tree from having these internal problems.
Well, what are some other things that you can do that actually damage your tree? You've got an example here.
Yeah. Well, you ever heard of killing something with kindness? But well, that's really not the case here. But this is taken. I took this from a tree in Nebraska when I was up there several years ago, and all this discoloration here is what they did was they were injecting this tree. This is a pin oak with the ace caps to trying to help the iron chlorosis that was going on with the iron in the tree. And they did it when the tree was young here. And they did it probably 15 or so years later here. And here's actually one of the capsules right there that are still in the tree. And if you can see here, look at how much discoloration is here, where each of the caps went in, both in previous years and in this surrounding year here. And then you can look real close here and you can see the discoloration that's going on all through here. Well, eventually what would happen is all this could become just an internal cavity in that tree. It's going to be a slow process because these wounds are so small throughout the tree, so it may be that it's not that critical, but you're certainly getting some internal problems with this tree by treating it. I guess you have to decide for yourself if that short-term solution to the iron chlorosis is worth perhaps some long-term problems that you might be creating.
So you have to think about it anytime you're wounding that cambium, that there could be a trade-off that's not quite so good.
That's right. Anytime you cut into the bark of the tree, you cut into the cambium, you bump a tree with a mower and it breaks the bark off. There's potential that you're going to have an internal cavity there. And I mean, think about the worst place on a tree to have a cavity form. Well, it's right down towards the bottom of the tree because that's where all the stress is. But if you wound it with a string trimmer, you can have some internal problems with that, mower. I mean, how many of us, and I'm probably guilty here, where I've carved my girlfriend's initial, in the tree, you break through that cambium layer, well, I'm causing problems on that, and anything you do like that breaks the integrity of the bark, you can have some internal cavities formed. The smaller the wound, the smaller the cavity. And the reason for that is because the trees do this compartmentalization process, and it just continually adds more wood onto it. And so the smaller the wound, like these are, the internal problems aren't as bad, where on this example here, the larger the wound is, the larger the problem you'll have, and eventually that's a hazardous situation, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Even with proper pruning, if you look here, what we have here is this is a branch that broke off in nature, and you can kind of see a little bit of the stub there, but in proper pruning and in just the natural course of a branch sealing over a wound, you have this callus growth, and that looks pretty good. That looks like it's good closure there and going on, and that tree's just doing fine. But if you look on the inside here, just look at all the internal problems and everything that tree can have. Even when visually on the outside, it still looks, pretty good. So sometimes there's hidden things that we don't know about on the inside of the tree. Just these real subtle clues like this tell us that there's some internal problems.
So what you're saying is the best thing to do is just to take care of our trees.
That's right. Prevention is the best way. Just don't harm those trees in any way. But if you think about it, some cavities really are okay to have in a tree. If you think about squirrels and birds and everything that benefit from it, it might be nice to have a few.
Yeah, we can have some homes for our wildlife.
Exactly.
So, well, thanks for talking to us today, Mark. You've given us some really great information, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.